David Papineau, what do you think philosophy and sports have in common?
Interesting. I used to think not that much. I've been a philosopher all my working life, academic philosopher, and I've been a keen amateur sportsman all my working life and before. And the two sides of my life never overlap very much. I mean, there is a sub part of philosophy, a speciality called philosophy of sport, but it's a bit dry, and it focuses mostly on doping and what kinds of violations the rules are acceptable, and that's about it. And I was never that interested. But I was invited to give a talk about philosophy and sport about just over a decade ago now, and I started thinking about what to say, and I couldn't think of anything interesting at all. And I thought, screw it, I'm just going to write a talk about something I'm interested in, which was fast reaction sports and how do athletes manage to control their movements when they have, 50 milliseconds or something. And I got very interested in it. I gave a nice talk. And then I thought, this is quite interesting because it had implications for philosophy outside sport. It had implications for the theory of action and action control generally. And I kind of developed some ideas about action control as a result of thinking about the sporting cases. It's not a big topic in the philosophy of sport, but I thought there's an interesting kind of cross-influence here. And then I started thinking, there's quite a lot of issues where sports is a kind of test case for philosophical theories because people are acting under extreme pressure often, and time constraints. Stakes are high. That makes it kind of interesting. And then the other way around, there were a few things in sport where I thought, look, the philosophers have got something to tell the sports theorists. And it wasn't really philosophy of sport, but was a whole set of topics that I got interested in. And I had a blog that ran for a few years and had a lot of fun. And then I made a book out of it. There's no natural kind of affinity as far as I can see, but there are quite a number of dimensions in which sports are kind of crucial experiments. It shows you things about humans that you wouldn't see otherwise. And of course, philosophy is a generally interesting topic area, and sports fans aren't always familiar with philosophy. So I thought there are a few things I could tell the sports fans as well from a philosophical point of view.
And David, you said that sports can be a test case for philosophy. I've heard of sports as kind of a test case for a lot of things in life. You could say that some were developed as sort of a way to get out aggression, or some show things about human nature, how we interact with others, things like that. What do you think a sport really is?
What makes something a sport? What's the definition of sport? That's what you're asking me now.
Well, I want to give you more leeway than that because, do you, as a philosopher, do you see it as a test case for life, as a demonstration of who we are in a competitive situation? I wonder, rather than trying to pin you down on a definition, I think we have time to find that.
Well, I'm interested in the definitional thing, and we'll talk about that in a while. But no, I don't think all sport is a kind of test case for philosophical theories. I mean, the thing I started with was, how can athletes deliberately set themselves a strategy when, as the ball's coming, they've got no time to think at all? And that's a very interesting setup. And philosophers tend to think that all deliberate action, all purposive action is kind of controlled in the moment. And it seems to me, if you think about these sporting cases, that can't be right. But notice, it's only fast reaction sports that have this implication. There's all kinds of sports which don't involve fast reactions. I don't know, curling. What else? I don't know. Do all sports involve fast reactions? I don't think so. Weightlifting. Shot putting. I mean, you're not responding to something coming in. You do it all in your own time. And not all sports are competitive, if you ask me. Most organized sports are competitive. I guess frisbee, the extreme frisbee enthusiasts, no, they still compete. They still have competitions. It's just that they self-police. But I think that recreational surfing is a sport. Somebody said, no, somebody asked me what sports, my doctor, do you do any sports? And I say, yeah, I do surfing. Doctor's not going to say that's not a sport. I mean, that's a sport, even though you're just doing it for fun. There's a whole range of different sports, and I don't think they have a uniform philosophical interest. It's case by case.
Yeah, and with something like the surfing too, it seems that the thrill is something different than competition for most people who do it. There are surfing competitions, but with that, it seems more of the pursuit of a state of that being connected to the wave and a sensation more than a competition. What do you think?
Yes, we're getting towards the definition of sport. You said you wanted to leave that for later, but perhaps we should.
We can go there. I wanted to give you space.
When I said there's a subject philosophy of sport and they only have a few topics, doping, cheating, but also what's the nature of sport? What's the definition of sport? That's one thing they talk about. We can talk about what most philosophers say. I think they get it wrong, but I have a very simple definition. Any activity that involves developing, enjoying, celebrating physical excellence, physical skills, that's what's essential to sports. And I think it's very deep in human nature that we take pride in our physical abilities. Among all animals, we can develop all kinds of amazing skills. I mean, historically, it wasn't especially to do with pure enjoyment and competition. It was for practical reasons that we developed skills. But once you start developing skills, you start to take pride and interest in developing them for their own sake. And that's what I think is the essential nature of sport. I think competition is something that comes on later. I mean, once you're acquiring, polishing these skills, it's quite natural to think, well, let's see if I can do it better than the next person. But I don't think that's the essential thing. Oldest sporting event I know of is Doggett's Coat and Badge, which is a rowing race on the River Thames. And it's still rowed, and it's rowed by watermen, people who are professional people on the water on the Thames. And it started, I think, in 1715. We could check the date, but I'm sure it's the 18th century. And there were just all these young men who were rowing people around the Thames for a living. And not surprisingly, they started to get interested in who was really the best rower, who could kind of develop this skill most. And then they had a competition. But I think developing the skill comes first. Competition is ancillary to that.
And perhaps you only compete with yourself, like in the surfing. You're just trying to have the best day you can.
You could say you're competing with yourself, but I'm not sure that doesn't reduce the notion of competition to not very much. No, I think the surf, they're taking pride and enjoyment in their physical skill. I mean, it's wonderful that you. I grew up on the beach in the Indian Ocean, but in the 50s, and it was a time before surfboards, was time before plastics, so there were no surfboards. They are made of balsa wood and canvas, and so I got pretty proficient as a body surfer. I just catch waves with nothing. But the guys who surf on big waves, their skills are amazing. I mean, I so admire.
And you're talking about your childhood and kind of getting at what sports we grow up with and how that can affect things as our success goes on in life. What do you make of the argument of nature and nurture in sport? What makes a family dynasty in sport?
Very interesting. You haven't mentioned my book yet, have you?
You have, and I have a copy right here.
Right. Very good, very good. I have a chapter in there on nature and nurture. And I got very interested, partly because now I'm going to have to talk cricket. I'm sorry if most of your viewers are from the States. Another story from
We'll try and keep up.
I'll digress. So when I had the book in draft and I was looking for publishers, I got an American publisher, Basic Books, very nice publisher, very, very good editor, Laura Hammett. But when we were discussing the contract, she said, look, this is great. So I really like this book, but can I make one request? I said, sure. She said, no cricket. She said, if you put cricket in, the American readers are going to turn away. And I said, no, look, hang on, I'll be sensitive. But I've lived all over the world, and I'm interested in many sports. I'm going to leave cricket out. Okay, the reason I have to talk about cricket now is cricket is very weird. I mean, it's in Britain, in England. I mean, it's England. It's the England cricket team. It's a big thing to get an England cricket team. They play India, Australia. I mean, it's a huge huge business now. I would say that the English cricket team nearly always has somebody in the team whose father or brother or uncle played cricket for England. I won't know the figures exactly, but I'm pretty confident of the 800 men who've played cricket for England, about 200 have had a brother or a father or an uncle who played for England. I mean, it's completely absurd statistic, and it's very interesting to compare it with soccer. There's nothing like that. I mean, there are some soccer families, but I'd say instead of 200, you'd have like 20. And so I got interested. What's the difference? Why does cricket run in families? Soccer doesn't. And I'm just trying to think of the American sports. Hockey, ice hockey have families. I'm just trying to think which other ones. Well, motor racing tends to have families.
Yes.
So, okay. Now the question is, look, is sporting excellence a matter of nature or nurture? And in particular, when you get these sports that run in families, do you think that's to do with genes are very important in cricket, but not in soccer? Or do you think it's to do with environment? And if you analyze it, I mean, look, I mean, it's not clear that you need special genes to be good at cricket. You just need pretty much the same skill set as you need for soccer. You need to be athletic, you need to be lithe, you need to be strong, and so on. So I think the difference is that cricket depends on environments much more than soccer does. I mean, we'll put it like this. Every kid has a chance to play soccer. It just takes a ball and a bit of flat ground. Cricket, you need a lot of equipment, you need a stadium, you need a special kind of pitch. I mean, in fact, that's why cricket died out in the States. I mean, it needs a very carefully prepared pitch. And apparently during the Civil War, young men all over the place wanted some sport, but they couldn't get a cricket pitch, so they just played baseball, where you don't have to worry about the grounds. So cricket is a game where becoming excellent depends on having the right environments. And if you think it through, it turns out that the sports that run in families tend to be the ones that require a great deal of environmental specialization. So I said, motor racing, ice hockey, the ones that depend on genes. So basketball, you need to be tall, and being tall is pretty gene dependent. But if you look at the figures, it doesn't run so much. And in fact, the ones that you might think of who've got athletic relations tend not to be the 7-footers. I know there's Lopez twins. They're two twins who one used to play for the Brooklyn Nets. They're both 7 feet. But you don't get basketball families in the same way as you get cricket families or ice hockey families. And the reason is that genes aren't transmitted from parents to children nearly as well as environments. I mean, if you're a motor racing father or a cricketing father, you can give your kids all the environment they need. But if you're a 7-foot basketball player, you're liable to have a child with somebody who isn't equally an outlier, and you get regression to the mean. And the consequence of all that is that activities that depend strongly on genes tend not to be transmitted down families, because the genes tend to get diluted by mating, whereas the activities depend just on environments or strongly on environments that can be passed down from parents to children. So, okay, the upshot of all that is that it depends. Some sports depend on genes and other ones depend on environments. And rather surprisingly, it's the one that depend on environments that run in families, not the one that depends on genes.
In your book, too, I think you mentioned outside of sport, politics being sort of like this, too. Is there something we can learn from that?
Well, so in that chapter I mention, there's a famous book by Francis Galton, Darwin's cousin, very eminent 19th century statistician and I'm afraid to say eugenicist. But he wrote a book called Hereditary Genius, and he took families from all walks of life, musicians, the Bachs and so on, eminent lawyers, but also all-in wrestlers and so on. And he just gave lots of examples where you had these kind of families, each generation, top people in these activities pop up. And he took it to be a demonstration that genes were important for excellence in all areas of life. And the thing I say in my book is that when you analyze the sporting cases, as I just did, you'll realize that the moral is the opposite one. The cases where you find top musicians, top lawyers popping up generation after generation are the areas of life where you need the right environment. They're not the areas of life where you need the right genes.
So sort of tied to the politics, then the example of something like the Bush family, we would say, rather than them all having excellent genes for politics, it's the access, it's father was president and you get that exposure and you're in the game.
What do you think?
It seems that way. And yet the genetic argument is intuitive for a lot of people, I think, to say, well, if somebody's dad is like this and then somebody's like it, what do they get from their dad? Then it's natural to grab onto that.
So I don't think I want to say that genes aren't important. I think, say, look, let's take the comparison cricket and soccer again. I think you probably need pretty good genes to be a top athlete. As I said, you need to be lithe, you need to be strong, and so on. But some sports need environments as well. And it's those ones where things run in families. And similarly, getting to be president of the United States, no doubt requires some genetically based ability. But if you ask me, it requires a lot of environmental help as well. So,
yeah. And when you point out soccer or football as a counterexample, I've been in third world countries where children will tie together straps of cloth until they get a ball and then put sticks in the ground to make a goal and start playing soccer in dirt. And you just get that exposure, and they're very skilled from playing like that. It doesn't seem to take any particular environmental resource.
Yeah. So what puts the top soccer players up there? Maybe because they have better genes than all the other kids, because all the kids get the environment they need to develop their soccer skills. So we can say soccer. I want to digress a minute about the terminology here. You're worrying about my British sensibilities, and when I started blogging on sport, I used the term soccer for association football, and some of my English friends called me out on this, and they said, "Why are you using this word?" And my first reaction was I thought they were accusing me of being old style, upper class British, because that's where I got my father always called the game soccer. But no, of course, they were thinking that I was using an American term. But in truth, it's not an American term at all until I don't know, 1980s. It was a standard English word. If you looked at the sports pages, the journalists would use soccer as a kind of elegant alternative to football all the time. And then once the States started getting interested in the game, a lot of younger British people thought soccer's the American word. We don't want to use the American word. We want to use the English word. So they stopped using a perfectly good English word under the mistaken impression it was an American word. And I'm rather impatient with that kind of thing. Abandoning your own traditions under the mistaken impression they're foreign imports is a rather sad failure of self-confidence, if you ask me.
Well, you've kept it then in your language.
What? Yeah.
So you've kept it.
I still use it, but now I'm sensitive in England. If I use soccer, people think I'm a bit weird. Yeah. But I do still use it among friends, among people I know. Yeah.
There was a book that came up in your book called The Theory and Practice of Gamesmanship. And it seems to be kind of a handbook for psychological manipulation in sports. I'm wondering, what's the significance to you of this element of sports, this gamesmanship, this manipulation, trash talking?
Yeah. So that's a famous book from it's a rather old style English book, but it was very, very amusing. And my take on it is that he wasn't a traditional aristocrat. He was a kind of middle-class fellow who'd come up through state schools and got a job as a lecturer at London University. And he was impatient with all the toughs who said, "Oh, you mustn't try so hard. It's just a game." And he thought, look, these people say that, but they really are trying really hard, and they're just trying to kind of get me to stop making an effort, and I'm not going to put up with this. And he started noting all the different ways in which people could try and get you to stop trying, to stop concentrating. What's one of his is, when you're on the tennis court, a couple of games in, you say, "Oh, my leg's all right now. I was a bit worried about if it was going to stand up, but it seems okay. I'll play a few more games and see how it is." Right. And so, of course, the opponent can't keep trying just as hard, knowing they're playing against an injured player. And I'm very fond of it. Of course, there's a fine line between. In that chapter, I start off with Nick Kyrgios, the Australian tennis player, who said to Stan Wawrinka in the middle of a tense match, he said, can't remember the other Australian player's name, Kyrgios's mate, Kokkinakis, I think. He said, "Stan, Kokkinakis banged your girlfriend. Sorry to have to tell you that, mate." And of course, it was probably true. And Wawrinka, he didn't win another game and retired with a bad back in the next set. And that's terrible behavior. That's awful. Kyrgios was rightly fined a large amount of money for that. But there's other cases where, a couple of quiet words can distract the opponent and seems perfectly reasonable. I tell the story about the last couple of holes of the American Open, Stan Snead and another journeyman professional whose name slips my mind, and they had two short putts on the last hole, second to last hole, 3-4 feet, and everybody knew that Snead was very yippish on his putts, and so this guy said, and he could see that probably it was Snead to go first, but he made them go and get a tape measure and to allow Snead to spend another 2, 3, 4 minutes thinking about his putt. And I think that's all right. That's if you were playing a friend for fun, that wouldn't be right. But professional context, I think a few edges like that are fine.
Yeah, we see examples of this a lot. I think of in American football, if there's an important kick for the kicker to make, they'll usually let the kicker get all set up, and then the opposing team will call a timeout just to kind of shake him out of his rhythm.
That's icing the kicker, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you seem to have a very clear line, though. There was that example earlier with the tennis players where you said, well, clearly that's awful.
Yeah.
And yet, how do we know what that line is?
I think it varies from sports to sports. In soccer, there's a lot of roughhousing and getting in the opponent's head. And I remember poor Zinedine Zidane in the World Cup final 2008. He was driven to distraction. He headbutted the other guy, got sent off.
And soccer players are notorious for acting and taking dives.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about the. I'm not sure I want to use soccer as the example, but
okay.
different sports have different codes of acceptable behavior. And I think a lot of variation, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just the convention, the understanding of this is how we're going to play the game. People are ready for some things. We can do that. And then there's other things that you can't do. And look, so the example I give in my book about trapping the ball when you catch it. In English, we say you catch it on the half volley. So you're running in. Are you going to get to it? You try and scoop it up. Maybe it hits the ground as you catch it. And in cricket, when that happens, it's slightly changed now because it's all on television. But before everything was replays, the fielder was absolutely supposed to say whether they called it or not. It wasn't left to the umpires. It was the fielder to say. And if you were found out claiming a catch where it was pretty obvious you knew you hadn't caught it, your teammates wouldn't want you to play for them anymore. It was completely unacceptable. Whereas in baseball, if a fielder does that, they're supposed to jump up, say, "I caught it," and put it to the umpire. It's down to the umpire to say whether they caught it or not. And you'd be letting your side down if you didn't go for it. And you might think, does this show that cricket is more ethical than baseball? I think absolutely not. I mean, baseball is, as you can know, obsessively ethical game. They're mad about standards. You're not allowed to run you're not allowed to celebrate when you hit a home run. You've got to trot around quietly. So they're just different understandings of how we play the game. I mean, a cricketer who claims a catch they know they haven't made is breaking the deal. There's an agreement between cricketers that we're not going to leave this to the umpire. In baseball, there's no such deal, and so it's perfectly okay to put it to the umpire. These are just different understandings of what our expectations of each other are. And when you have that kind of understanding, then it's bad behavior to try and take advantage of the fact that the other players are sticking to a certain code. That's bad behavior because you're breaking an agreement. But what the agreement is can vary quite a lot from sports to sports.
So we started this kind of discussion on talking about how we want to watch out for people who kind of get you to play down and they say, oh, it doesn't matter how it turns out. But what do you make of sincerity in ideas like it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game?
No, it matters if you win or lose. Of course it does. I mean,
this is something that I hear parents say a lot. They tell their kids, the kid's bummed out, they lost the game. It doesn't matter whether you win or lose. How'd you play the game?
No, well, it matters how you play the game as well. But it's nice to win, and if you're not trying to win, I said, it's not obvious to me that competition is a necessary part of all sports, but many sports it's built into. If you're going to play tennis, you've got to be playing an opponent, and it's the nature of the activity that you're trying to beat them. If you're not trying to beat them, you're not playing tennis. You might be knocking up or something. And so you've got to try and win. And if you're trying to win, then you'll be pleased if you win. Sometimes the stakes are much higher than other times. But even when I'm just playing my friend, the two of us in the afternoon, I want to win. I try my hardest. I'm really pleased when I win. But it's not the only point of the exercise, because often, I often play people who beat me nearly every time. It doesn't mean that I don't want to play them. But still, if I wasn't trying to win, then I wouldn't be playing tennis.
Do you think you would keep playing someone if they beat you every time, or would you maybe tire of it?
Yeah, I'd tire of it. We'd have to work out something to make it a bit more interesting.
That's something that I wonder about with this idea of, it's how you play the game, is that in life we want to participate in games with people. Kind of, we have collaborative activities. You and I doing this interview, there are lots of things that we do with other people.
Yeah.
And then maybe there's a lesson in sport about how we collaborate or even compete with others. I wonder what you make of that.
Sure. I mean, it's a cooperative activity me and my friend to play a game of tennis, but that's clearly consistent with being a competition. One person is going to win. We're both trying to win. And to some extent, we're pleased when we win and disappointed when we don't. That's the whole nature of the activity. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it goes back to taking pride in one's physical excellence. And one way of measuring that you've done well is by beating another person. I kind of can do quite well against somebody who beats me every time, but somehow it's not in that structure that I'm being encouraged to be better. There's no way of measuring, am I doing any better? And so I suppose in tennis, I got 2 games this time. That's a bit miserable if you lose all the time. Yeah. So I think the competition is just part of the structure of a lot of sports. I don't think it's hugely important. So we get upset sometimes when I have, a social tennis group, and so you want to play well, but you want to show good character as well. I mean, sometimes I my wife says, did you play well? Did you show good character? And it does matter how you play the game as well.
It's something that's clearly over the line.
Yeah.
What was Bountygate?
But now, hang on, let me get it clear. There was a British case of malpractice where they I think it was called Bloodgate, where they feigned blood injuries because the rules for substitution, it made a difference if you had a blood injury or not. If you had a blood injury, then you could be substituted. And if you didn't, I mean, there was a limited number of substitutions. Once you used them up, you could have. And one team was taking little blood pellets onto the field and faking blood injuries, right? No, that was terrible when they found out.
In their mouth, like a secret agent with a cyanide capsule?
Yeah, exactly. It come off dribbling blood.
No way.
No, absolutely.
So they bite it, and then the blood runs down their face, and I have to substitute out.
Yeah.
I never heard of that one.
Right. So I was just trying to remember which was which. So Bountygate was the Saints, wasn't it? Was the Saints were found out giving players bonuses for injuring the opposition. Yeah. Well, that's horrible, isn't it? I mean, and so you can tell that. Well, I mean, I'm not an expert on American, but my impression is that when that came out, everybody was agreed this was shameful. The Saints were ashamed. They didn't say, "Oh, everybody does this" or anything like that. I mean, there was no suggestion that this was a good thing. So yeah, there's cases where, I mean, even if everybody is doing it, well, they're not doing it openly. It's kind of it's not acceptable. I mean, the interesting thing is when these parameters change, and in my lifetime, especially in soccer, they've changed a huge amount. And to some extent, this is just the conventions changing, like you don't have to declare that you caught the ball, you trapped it anymore. I mean, that cricket could become like baseball. It wouldn't mean that everything had gone to rot. It just meant that the conventions have changed a bit, and that can happen. But sometimes the conventions change where, if you ask me, it's gone over the line of what's objectively morally acceptable. And Bountygate clearly looks like that. I think everybody could see that. Everybody could see that even if all the teams did it and did it openly, that became the convention. That would be a bad thing. That's not what we want to happen. And yeah. I mean, there's tendencies in that direction sometimes, and then authorities need to step in and try and do what they can to stop such developments.
So to where we began this conversation about sports maybe being kind of a model for other things in life, what does something like Bountygate tell us about the difference between breaking a law and just being plain immoral?
So I think there's a whole level of different sets of rules that you can see clearly in sport, but I think it applies. So the philosophers of sport do a bit of this. I mean, one thing they noticed is that the rules as written down in the laws of baseball, 240 pages of it, or the same for gridiron or any sport, are not the laws that are enforced by the officials. So in soccer, you have to take a throw in from where the ball went out. That's not enforced. Players steal 5-10 yards and the referees don't mind. You have to take a free kick from where the referees do enforce that. But the rule book doesn't distinguish. It's the referees. They enforce some of the written down rules and not others. So there's the written down rules. There's the rules that you're going to be penalized for. But not all the rules that you're going to be penalized for are bad behavior. So there's a sense among the players of what's acceptable infringements of the rules. I mean, certain kind of fouls. Everybody does it. Nobody thinks that's bad behavior. You take your penalty. That's it. I mean, in basketball, you stop the clock. You do a foul. Nobody thinks that's bad behavior. That's what you're supposed to do. And so there's things that the referees will punish, which still aren't bad behavior. And that's because they're within the arena of what the players have agreed. This is how we're going to play the game. We're going to break the rule in these ways and take punishment. And I think, okay, and then finally, you have the question of what's objectively right and wrong. And to a large extent, doing what the players have agreed is what's right, and breaking what the players have agreed is wrong. But sometimes, if Bountygate became standard, doing what the players agreed would still be immoral. So you had all these different gradations. And I think it works just the same in real life, outside the sporting context. There's the laws of the land as written down. There's the laws as enforced by the police, which are are rather different. The things which, if you get caught, you'll get fined, you'll get a traffic fine, you'll get certain kinds of cheating. I mean, I don't want to. There's things which, if you're found out, you'll be fined. You might even go to jail, but nobody thinks that's bad. We could probably think of some examples. And then there's things that are really bad, and they're really bad even if people think it's okay. So the sporting cases show us that we need to recognize all these different levels of norms, of codes of behavior, and get clear about which ones matter and which ones don't.
So, David, something you write about is finding the difference between legitimate conventions and something that's just a corrupt practice. How do we come to that conclusion?
But now you're asking a big philosophical question.
Yes.
What's the nature of objective morality? And for present purposes, I'm quite happy to say, no, there's just a fact of the matter that, paying people to injure opponents, that's not acceptable. Taking an extra 10 yards for throw-ins, that is acceptable. Claiming a catch that you haven't made, that's acceptable if everybody agrees about it. That's just, what are the standards of morality? I'm inclined to think they're pretty objective. They're the same across all societies and histories. And what we find varying, people think, look, morality is relative, it depends on the society. I think what we find varying are just the conventions, the agreements about how we're going to arrange things. So we move away from the sporting context. So, in Britain, America, you meet somebody, you shake hands. If you meet somebody in the Far East, you don't shake hands. Does that mean that people in the Far East are rude, not respectful? No, they bow. So, and they might regard us as rude, but you shouldn't regard somebody as rude for not shaking hands or for not bowing, as the case may be. You should recognize that different societies have different ways of doing what is required, which is to be polite and respectful to people. And that's an absolute rule, but different societies have different ways of doing it. And I think to quite a large extent, you can take the view that this is a difficult area, but at first pass, I'd be inclined to say that all societies, all humans, they're in favor of fairness, they're against cruelty, they're in favor of self-esteem, they're in favor of autonomy, they're in favor of cooperation, and so on. And then different societies have different ways making arrangements, making agreements, making conventions that allow them to achieve these things. Having said that, different societies will weigh those different goods differently, and that makes for quite a lot of relativism. But it's not like any societies don't approve autonomy at all. I mean, value cooperation more highly than autonomy, but that's a matter of balance. So I'm in favor of universal moral values, and most of the differences we see just being differences in how societies are agreeing to pursue those.
And David, that weighing differently, that's when we have competing virtues, something like say justice on one hand, nonviolence on another. How do people sort those out?
I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're going to get any clear answers here. I mean, there's cases where it's just whatever you're going to do is going to be both right and wrong. I mean, you're abandoning justice or you're abandoning nonviolence, and you can't do both. Yeah. They're real moral dilemmas often.
David, we've talked about sport as being kind of a celebration of physical skills. I'm curious how much of it comes down to the human physical skill. I'm curious, do you think something like car racing, motorsports, it really qualifies as a sport?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I'm not very big on motor racing. I follow it a little bit. My son's pretty keen, but I can't say I've really watched it or anything. So I don't know what the skills are, but clearly it's a highly skillful business, right? I mean, the top motor racers, they start off as kids on go-karts and they work their way up, and then clearly they get to the top because they're really the best at doing this. And what is it they're good at? They're good at physical skill. I mean, they're good at kind of, controlling the wheel and going as fast as they can without crashing. So it's certainly a physical skill. Now, you're thinking that it's not athletic enough. It's not, What about golf? How do you think golf's not a sport? What about? I mean, there's a lot of extreme cases in my country. Two very big sports are darts and snooker, and some people think they're not really sports. I mean, I have an old encyclopedia of sports, which is edited by John Arnott, very fine book, has all kinds of sports, pelota, deck quoits, and so on, but doesn't have snooker and darts in. I think that's kind of class prejudice because they're played in bars and there's a lot of smoking around and drinking and so on. But I think they're clearly sports. They're extremely physically skillful. You can get a lot of esports is a tricky one. Now you've got kids who are just kind of fiddling with their Xbox, and is that a sport? By my counting, yes, it is. It's a physical.
Yeah. With things like motorsports, I see the athleticism. Absolutely. I wonder about the augmentation with a machine. And if you're not moving on your own power, how much of it comes down to the machine, how much of it is a sport, and how much of it is almost like, I look at Formula One and I look at a lot of those drivers very similar to test pilots who I knew when I was in the military. It's this sort of test pilot attitude. It seems the car is changing from week to week. So what of that?
Yeah. But a lot of sports involve equipment. They're crucial. I mean, tennis players from 30 years ago wouldn't stand a chance with their old equipment. It's hugely, hugely changed. And so I don't think you can rule it out on that count. So it's a bit tiresome to my mind when the differences between the different cars is so much of what makes for victory. And I mean, I would, from that point of view, be happier if, there are sailing races where, in the Olympics, they all have to have exactly the same equipment. And I think, do they just have a stock of boats and they all use them? I'm not sure. In sailing, you don't always have to get your boat from the kind of stock for the competition, but you're very, very constrained in what the measurements and conditions of the equipment can be. When it comes to the America's Cup, so motor racing in America's Cup is partly a competition between the equipment manufacturers. That's kind of part of the idea.
Yes.
And to that extent, it takes away from its being a competition between the athletes. And so, of course, that's right. But you can see there's reasons why in these cases it's an equipment manufacturer competition as well as athlete competition. Interesting.
Yes, to put a little more on it, to make it specific.
Tennis and golf, the equipment's terribly important, but we don't feel it's such an equipment manufacturer's competition. Yeah, because
right.
It's easy enough to copy and standardize, and they'll all use the best equipment. So.
Yeah, whereas in something like Formula One, it's very much between the companies that make the cars, and they even call it a constructors championship, which they award the maker of the car. And the reason the sport is called Formula One is that there's a formula, a set of rules, and then they're building the cars within this set of rules, but the rules change from year to year. Teams are trying to find loopholes in the rules. So this year, for example, McLaren is way out in front of everybody. They just seem to be at the top of virtually every race.
Yeah.
Just yesterday, there was another race where one of their drivers won. And so their excellence in making the car within this formula has set them apart, it seems. I'm sure their drivers are outstanding too.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much of that, when you have a different machine, and then you're exercising your athletic skills on top of that.
I'd never thought about that, but given the views I've adopted about what sports are and so on, now I think about it, these constructors competitions are not themselves athletic competitions, and when you have then the America's Cup sailing or the Formula One, it's only in part an athletic competition. It's also a constructors competition, which isn't athletic at all. So I agree about that. Now, that doesn't come up in the book. It's not an issue that occurred to me especially, but yeah, I take the point.
It hadn't occurred to me either until this discussion that when I watch a Formula One race, I'm watching two competitions. I'm watching a competition between the drivers and a competition between the constructors, that one could be seen as a sport and perhaps the other is something different.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. And it just becomes a matter of definition, whether that's sport or not. It's like chess boxing. Have you come across chess boxing?
I am now. Thanks
Chess
to you.
I I don't think it's really taken off, but there have been a few tournaments, and it's a competition where you box and you play chess in between rounds, and you lose if you're checkmated or if you're knocked out. And you want to make sure that you don't get your brain too rattled because you'll get checkmated. And I think, is that a sport? Because to my mind, chess is not a sport, but boxing clearly is. So it's a kind of hybrid of two things, one sport and one not. I mean, you happy with chess not being a sport?
Yes.
There's the chess authorities and the bridge authorities are all desperate to get themselves classified as sports and be in the Olympics, partly because a lot of money comes with it. But I think that would be wrong, because there's no athleticism involved. There was a court case in Britain, and the judge ruled that bridge was a sport because he said, what about darts? There's not much physical activity in darts. And there's a lot more physical activity in bridge. You're dealing the cards but I think that was wrong, because the physical side to bridge is not of the essence. I mean, you'd still be playing bridge if you, God forbid, you couldn't deal the cards. You had to get somebody else to move everything for you. You'd still be playing bridge. You'd give the instruction. You're still playing chess. Even if you don't move the pieces, you tell somebody else to move the pieces. But you aren't playing darts if you get somebody else to throw for you.
This chess boxing tangent.
Yeah.
What's the strategy to chess boxing? Because if I'm chess boxing against Mike Tyson,
yeah,
the first round we get into boxing, it's over. So what do you do? Do you try to stall if you're outdone?
You play chess afterwards, so I don't think maybe you should change the rules and get a few chess moves in before you start boxing. Perhaps you could get him with fool's mate in the first 2 or 3 moves.
Do they use weight classes like traditional boxing?
I don't think it's really taken off.
Okay.
It was originally a kind of performance artist who did it with a friend, but then a few people did get interested, and there were a couple of tournaments, but I don't think it's going on.
Let's talk a little bit about what makes a team too. Teams, getting behind your team, a huge part of sport. So you use the phrase a persisting object. I'm thinking again of something like Formula One, where the teams, they change quickly too. They only have 2 drivers. Somebody's contract is up. And we talked a little bit about, before we started, about how Red Bull has just changed their team leader. So how does that team persisting object element play out? What is that?
So I never really thought about they're called teams in Formula One, the Red Bull team.
You would, or if you were to ask, a fan, who's your team? They might say, oh, Ferrari.
Do fans really have teams as opposed to drivers, that they'll carry on supporting the team after the drivers change?
Now that you put it like that, I'm not so sure. I was with a friend yesterday, and he said, oh, my daughter loves Max Verstappen, and he's a Red Bull driver. And somebody else says, oh, Charles Leclerc, he's my favorite. Do they really get behind a team? I wonder. And that's why this persisting object question I find interesting.
But plenty of sports, the teams are crucial. I mean, as you know, all your major sports, team sports, soccer in Britain's huge. And then we do get these questions of, is it still the same team? The most famous case of Dodgers being taken off to Los Angeles. Terrible thing. I've got old New York friends who still resent it. Terrible. But is it still the same team? It's hard to tell. Clearly, they can persist. It's not just the collection of the players, because the players turn over very fast, and it's still clearly the Boston Red Sox have been going for 100 years, even though the players are long gone. So it's an interesting thing. What does make the team stay to count as still the same team? I guess if it stays in the same place, keeps the same name, has the same stadium, has the same uniform and so on, then there's no problem. It's pretty obvious it's the same team. But once they start merging or splitting or moving location, more complicated.
What is the importance of the city, the country element? I think, again, of, we're talking about Formula One, it's these constructors may have a country. So we can say McLaren is from England. When their driver wins, they play first that driver's national anthem, and they will also play the British national anthem to honor McLaren. And yet, I don't know that there's a particular British enthusiasm around it.
Yeah, look, I'm not taking these Formula One teams very seriously as teams.
Are we ruling them out?
I'm just curious. I mean, I hadn't really thought about it. I'm surprised that you're putting forward them as examples of teams. And look, one of the things that makes the teams important is that they have fans who attach themselves to teams and remain attached all through their lives, and for many people becomes a big part of their life. I remain to be convinced that that happens in Formula One.
So what is the significance then of it being your city's team? Like you said, the Boston Red Sox, or the issue with the Brooklyn Dodgers becoming the Los Angeles Dodgers. What's the weight of that location?
I guess I'm just trying to think, are there cases of teams that people will follow that don't have a kind of geographical identity? It's not obvious to me that there's many such examples. So, think about it a bit, but
maybe the esports? Would that be another edge case?
Esports, with esport teams. I don't know enough about esports. I mean, in fact, I don't even know enough about how athletic esports are. I mean, there's lots of different sports and their combination of dexterity and tactics. And I think some of them, the dexterity becomes a very minor part. Others, dexterity is the whole thing. So I don't know about esports, but let's think about cases that we know. And can you think of any teams that have a significant number of fans for whom it's important they support this team where they don't have a geographical location? People become attached to, or they're part of something. They're part of maybe their work, or what else do people kind of root for? Their religion, but the most natural thing to
these
root
tribal
for
things
is your geographical location. I mean, people root for their city, they root for their country. And yes, well, religion, I mean, not so much anymore. Britain, we have Scotland in Glasgow, two big teams, Celtic and Rangers. Celtic was the Catholic team and Rangers was the Protestant team. And Liverpool too Liverpool was the Catholic team, Everton the Protestant team. That's kind of fading away, but not entirely. So you get the fans attaching themselves to something they identify with. So they can identify in terms of religion, they can identify most commonly in terms of geography. This is our local team. It's very natural to be backing your local team. And to the extent it's very striking in the modern professional world that you're not specially backing a set of players because 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, the whole team has completely changed, but you're still backing your local team. So I think the geographical element is pretty big in creating this kind of fan-based teams.
Yeah, I'm seeing this more clearly now, and we've put a lot of nuance on my Formula One questions. Another thing that I'm thinking about with that is that next year there will be a team that represents Cadillac and General Motors, which is sort of presenting itself as an American team.
Yeah.
Yet the drivers that they've chosen are both not Americans, but they're doing advertisements with Keanu Reeves about how it's an American tradition or it's the part of a legacy and things like that. But it seems without some way to really connect to a hard location, it's not quite there. Also, these teams are brands. They're the names of these companies rather than a mascot or something like that.
But I'm really ignorant about Formula One. So traditionally, the names of the teams were the names of the car manufacturers, right?
Yes.
What's Red Bull doing in there?
Red Bull. What are they doing? They're there to be public and to sell Red Bull and to advertise Red Bull.
But Red Bull's not a car, right? Red Bull's a drink, isn't it?
Red Bull's a drink, and then they work with car manufacturers, and then they hire engineers under their team to engineer hopefully a better car than any other manufacturer can make.
So is the Cadillac Formula One thing a new thing? Have there been American teams in Formula One before?
Yeah. So right now there's a team that is made by the constructor is called Haas. They're not known for making cars, but Haas is the constructor, and that's an American company. But the identity as being American isn't particularly clear. I think a lot of their buildings and things for the company would be located in other countries, although they do have some in the States. The drivers are not Americans. It's not connected to America in a lot of ways.
But Formula One, is it a big American thing? You have Indy racing, in Indianapolis 500. You have
Yeah, we have all kinds of motorsports. We have NASCAR, which
right,
is tremendous as well. I think Formula One is something that has grown.
it's production cars. Is that roughly
These cars are more standardized in other sports.
right? Right. Yeah.
Yeah, Formula One is much more about the innovation of the vehicle.
I see. Well, good luck with the Cadillac team. We'll see how it goes. Yes. No, I hadn't really thought through the question of. I mean, I talk a lot in my book about fandom and how people get attached to teams, but I hadn't.
What makes the fans so attached to their team?
You can become attached to your school, right? Your high school. People become your college. I mean, in the States, you have people becoming attached to their college, right? So in the first instance, it's college. I'm proud of that college. I might give money to the college, and now I support the football team. And that's not a geographical thing. That's another kind of identification. Interesting. We don't have that in this country, especially. People don't.
You don't have that connection to university sports. So you're at King's College London, and if their sports teams did well, that wouldn't excite you?
Very minor. I mean, Oxford and Cambridge used to be big. They're still in the boat race. Some people will be interested in the Oxford-Cambridge rugby match, but was much bigger 50, 100 years ago. So, yes. And so it's quite natural to identify with something you're part of. I mean, outside sports, you identify with your village. You might identify with your neighborhood, your town, your country. I mean, I'm an academic. I identify with my university and especially with my department. And we compete with other departments, other philosophy departments for various kinds of prestige. So it's very natural to kind of something else we might talk about, but we're a team. We work together in furthering our collective interest. And I think of identifying with sports teams as just another. I mean, there's a slight mismatch there, a slight detachment in that, my department, my village, I might be doing something to further its interest. I'll be on the village council, I'll be organizing things for my department. If I'm a Tottenham Hotspurs fan, which I am, I don't really do much of that. I go to the game and I shout. But Tottenham fans, they think of themselves. I mean, we're really interested in what the team should be doing. And if there wasn't so much money involved, we had more control. We would be involved. We would be involved in which players we're buying, which players play where, and what tactics we're going to use, and so on. So I think despite the fact there's some element of fantasy here, it is very similar to being part of something and wanting to your village, your department, whatever, to your family to succeed.
Yeah. There are people who will even say when they're watching a team that they're rooting for and then that team wins, they'll say after the game, "We won," as though they were contributing or as though they deserve some sort of credit or connection to it.
Yeah.
And David, you used the word fantasy. This is reminding me of another conversation I had with a man named Mark Juergensmeyer from UC Santa Barbara. And he studies war and religion and religious violence.
Yeah.
It seems there's almost a similarity here. He calls religion and war both alternative realities, that they're these sort of absolute worlds that we can project ourselves into. What do you make of sport as a similar kind of alternative reality?
That sounds right to me. But are you thinking of sport as from the spectator's point of view or for the participant's point of view? I mean, I think what you're talking about applies in both dimensions.
I believe so too, as I would say war does, very much like for the soldier, as it does for the person whose country is at war.
Yeah.
I see it for the athlete as much as for the fan in some ways.
I mean, I think the analogies are close. So when we started off, we were talking about sport as a kind of arena in which humans are pressed in various extreme ways, fast reaction sport, intensity of competition, and so on. And I said that shows us a lot about humans, which we wouldn't otherwise be able to see, and it's philosophically interesting. But of course, the same would apply in war. And for most people, thank goodness, they aren't going to war all the time, and it's not a present issue. But you might think that in some ways sport has replaced war in pushing people to extremes in these kind of ways. Yes. Why is it a fantasy, though? I mean, for people who are at war, it's not a fantasy. For people for whom religion is important, is it a fantasy?
Mark would use the term alternative reality. Something like warfare allows people to make absolutes, rather than to see nuance, but to say we are at war. And
Right.
so that is the enemy. They are bad. We are good.
Yeah, but there's one way in which I think there's a disanalogy between sport and war and religion. And I think it's something very much to the credit, it's a good side of sport, which is that it's a natural leveler. If we just think about the sporting context, I mean, often sport will be muddled up with international antagonisms that have a history of war and maybe religious antagonisms I mentioned, but not always. And sometimes you will have sporting contexts and you will be rooting for your side, but the other side wins. Unless you're an idiot, you will standardly think, well, the best side won. We are playing, as it's put, on a level playing field. This is a competition between people who are equally entitled to win, if only they can display the excellences that requires. And so there's something about sporting content. It's built in that you should respect your opponents. They're doing the same thing as you. They're trying to use the same kinds of means as you to triumph. And if they do, it's because they did it better than you did. And it's different from war and religion, where you feel that your side has an entitlement. I mean, perhaps not everybody, but that's a natural condition in those kind of conflicts. You think that your side is entitled in the way the other one isn't, and that disappears with sport. I mean, it's one reason I think international sport is a very healthy thing, because it requires contests where, at least as far as the contest is concerned, you're treating the other side as equally entitled to triumph, to benefit.
So we can say that this disappears, and we do have examples of fans who will go crazy for their team and will hurt other people just because they represent the opponent and things like that too. What makes the fan lose that connection to reality?
Well, I think that's natural enough. I mean, we've been talking about how people will root for their family, their village, their university, their country, their town, and people can become very animated in these ways. The lucky thing is, when it comes to sports, as I'm saying, you have to be a bit stupid to think that your entitlement is greater than the entitlement of the other side. I mean, it's kind of, this is a level competition between two different sides of people who are very similar, trying to do the same thing. And if you think, God, I really hate the other side, if you're sane, you can see there's something wrong with that attitude. I mean, it happens. It happens because not everybody is particularly rational and measured, but it is somewhat pathological when that happens.
David, before I ask my last question, where should people look for you online?
Now, I have a website, which is David Papineau, all one word, .co.uk.
We'll put a link to that in the description and a link to your book for people to check out.
That's very good of you. That's very kind.
And David, my last topic really is, what do we gain from playing sports?
Interesting. I don't think that sporting activity requires any justification. Some people think, sport's not serious. It's just playing games. Why are grown-up people doing this? I think that's completely the wrong attitude. I think that developing, enjoying, celebrating, admiring physical skill is very basic to the human condition. I mean, that's what humans do. I mean, okay, not all humans do it. There are people who aren't particularly athletic, who aren't particularly interested. Not everybody has to be interested in all the good things in life. But I think it clearly is one of the good things in life for the people who can to have physical skills, to exercise them. What fun. It's kind of, I think it's more than fun. It's part of what makes living worthwhile. Yeah. I'm being slightly empty in my defensive sport, but that's because I think it's such an obvious thing for humans to do and enjoy and get value out of.
Maybe we can be more specific. What do you gain from playing sport? I mean, you write about how you've tried so many sports, you continue to play sports.
Well, I just enjoy exercising my body, exercising skills. There's all kinds of ancillary things. I mean, I see my friends. I do a lot of sailing. In fact, my sailing now is just recreational sailing. I don't race. I think it's pretty marginal sport because unlike windsurfing, there's not much skill involved in sailing. You're outside. You're in the open air. You're part of nature. That's part of it. But it's just the physical skills. I mean, I still play quite a lot of golf. I mean, you hit a drive, you hit it in the middle, 200 yards. It's delightful. It's delightful. What could be better?
Yeah, yeah. Well, Dr. David Papineau, for this conversation and for your book, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
No, but thank you for having me on. It's been fun.